Welcome to Command Shift Left, the podcast that helps you navigate the treacherous waters of the software development, ops, and security world while also diving into the hot current trends in the industry. Join myself, developer Philip, our co-host Vice.
Hey audience!
As we battle through hilarious real-world stories, pro tips and hacks for navigating your way around developer security, learning about our Shift Left life, and life stories that have saved our ass.
For this episode, we have two wonderful guests. We have Dr. Sarah Gothelis. I hope I'm pronouncing it correct. Gothel. So you'll hear more from her in a second. And also Rizzo. And this would be a great time for you to share about yourself. Let's start with you, Rizzo.
Hey everyone, I'm a staff developer advocate at a company called TBD. They're basically like a business unit within Block. Little about myself that I would want to tell people. I host a weekly live stream where I talk to different developers about like open source or digital identity solutions. And if y'all want to tune in, it's at twitch.tv/tvdevs.
Amazing. Sarah, how about yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Sarah Guffels and I lead DevRel at Sentry. Prior to this, I've done pretty much everything related to educating developers of all ages and experience levels, from teaching children as young as 5 to teaching university students, writing books. Most latest one was GitHub for Dummies. And I like to build software that helps developers make cool stuff. So anything that I can do related to content or software to help developers is my jam.
Wonderful. And I have to say, Sentry is one of my most beloved dev tool companies. Been a fan for a while, so it's really great to have you here. We should probably have David Kramer come in at some point as well.
Definitely.
Awesome. So I think this is a great point to start with our first fact, and that fact actually comes from me. And my fact for this episode is that IPv4 was set at 32-bit address space on a whim. So Vint Cerf was known as one of the fathers of the internet. He was working as a developer at DARPA, and he was basically tasked with designing the headers, the structures for the both IP and TCP. And he was basically thinking about this, how big do we need to make the address space? And he just went, I think like 32-bit, that should suffice. No, he just asked his boss, and his boss was like, yeah, 32-bit, that's a lot. So in like integers, like amount of addresses, that's 4,294 million and a little over addresses. So it's 2 to the power 32. And yeah, at the time when you just had a couple of universities, a few Ministry of Defense and other kind of government organizations on the really early web, that seemed like enough. And obviously that's not enough today. We're actually at the point where AWS has started to charge you more for IP4 addresses because they're more rare. They're a commodity that is hard to get. So it's kind of funny to think that something very, very basic, like a developer just picking the size or type of memory size for their code dramatically changes our entire world. And now we're all struggling we're so far. I think it's already 20 years with it. We're trying to work our way and move to IPv6, but we're not there yet. And it actually costs us a lot of money just because Vint thought that 32-bit is enough. I have a follow-up fact here, but first I want to ask you folks, what do you think about this? What do you think about our ability to affect the world as developers just by picking a size for our types?
This is something that I always try to bring up, especially with folks who are learning to program at whatever age, is that a lot of decisions are just decisions an individual person made, whether it's the design of a language and why, Python uses tabs and, Java uses curly braces or whatever the thing is. It's really just a bunch of decisions. And so it's important when you're developing, especially in my line, like dev tools, to think about how someone might use this tool in the future. And it's it's all just going to be a decision. Like it's there's no magic crystal ball to help us like understand exactly what decision we should make. So, you know, like one of my other favorites is the difference between GitHub and the way that they think about source control, and then the way that Microsoft did prior to the GitHub acquisition. I was on the team that led GitHub integrations into Visual Studio, and we would often get developers putting in issues saying, hey, this GitHub integration isn't working. It's like, actually, it's the Visual Studio Git integration that isn't working. And when we would go talk to the folks at Microsoft, they were like, well, how are you sorting this, you know, like this source control? Like, how are you resolving these conflicts? And their model was just completely upside down from ours. So just, you know, understanding that software is literally built by humans. Well, we'll see about that for long, but
I love that you brought that up. Just because, so you were bringing up the fact that, you know, we should think about how like you're developing your software, but I was also thinking about like how you mentioned students. I've also taught people how to code. Like I ran a nonprofit doing that, and people like that are new to coding, they don't realize how like creative coding is, and they get really caught up. Like I was like almost giggling at like not at the student, but with this student, because they like took out a ruler, they were trying to like measure the pixel. And I was like, you don't need to do that. Like a lot of software, like you're saying, is just like sometimes a random decision, and sometimes you have to experiment and see like, does this work? Does this hit? If not, let's see how we like change it.
Yeah. But let's say you could go back in time. Like you can teleport now back to the 70s, sit next to Vint and tell him, maybe use 64-bit or something else. Would you?
Well, honestly, I don't know that would necessarily change a lot. Like, I feel like we would just end up, like, folks would end up using, you know, IP addresses differently to monopolize on the, like, you know, multiplier number of addresses available. And so maybe we wouldn't have run into, you know, the issue of needing IPv6 like right away, but or like as soon as we did. But I still think there would have just been another type of issue kind of arising. I feel like especially as developers, we like to push the envelope, right? Like we like to get right up to that boundary and say, why is this boundary here? Let me try to push through it. And so, you know, that's, I feel like no matter what, we would have just kind of reached that boundary and in some way. But yes.
Yeah. I think that there are implications to both sides. So now you increase the size of that packet, and we need to remember back at that date that there was a lot of memory. So that might have slowed down networks or slowed down even the progress of networks. Who knows? But I definitely want to be able to run that experiment, like go back in time and see where humanity ends just by changing a variable, that variable type, not even the value, right. The variable type. So that would be exciting. And by the way, Vint
what
Cerf,
if Ada Lovelace could run her program on on Charles Babbage's machine, right? Like,
I think it would be a completely different reality now. We already be like in the singularity. Another cool fact that kind of follows here is that Vint Cerf is still building these type of protocols. He just graduated into like the big leagues, and he's working with Google and with NASA on interplanetary communication protocols. And that's something that I kind of like to think about because it has a lot of interesting challenges. So one of the basic things that you have in like a control protocol like TCP is agreeing on the size of window or the pace where you're sending packets. And physics, when you do interplanetary, when you do long distances like that, physics gets in the way. It's so this is actually a great question for like job interviews for developers. Just think about how you manage to synchronize something when you don't have the ability to take time into calculation easily.
There was a really interesting, I did an internship with NASA JPL, Jet Propulsion Lab, when I was an undergrad. And that was the time when they had the Mars rover stuck. Curiosity was stuck. And like it could, I'm pretty sure that was the one. And it took 24 hours because they had to wait until the moon was visible in the sky to send a message, right? And then also like it took a long time. The packets had to be very small. And so to help get the rover unstuck, they actually recreated the like area that the rover was in, but down here on Earth, optimized for the number, like the fewest number of changes to the position of the rover to get unstuck, and then sent them one at a time over the course of like a week. But yeah, they had to like think about like, how can we debug this rover, this hardware from Earth on, you know, like it just, yeah. It was either the Mars or the moon. I can't.
And I know developers that complain about setting up another database instance in AWS to replicate their incidents and errors. So yeah, that gives you some proportion, I think.
Yeah.
Amazing. And I think this is a perfect time to move to our second fact. And that fact belongs to you, Sarah. Take it away.
Yeah, so my fact for this episode is that the performance issue that you're experiencing in your app is likely coming from a third-party script.
Ooh, like statistically?
Yeah. Yes, statistically. So essentially, and I don't have the exact details on the statistics yet, but I'm going to be writing about this soon. But essentially, you know, nowadays, especially, everyone is running additional kind of third-party apps or scripts on your site or on your mobile app, whether it's for ads or it's for social integrations or it's just for analytics. You know, you have some other third-party script running on your app. And obviously with Sentry, you know, we're always thinking about performance and helping folks identify, you know, where that performance issue is happening. And as we started to build out our support for distributed tracing, which is being able to trace performance issues or errors from the front end all the way down to the back end, all the way to your database calls, all the way to your server and to the third-party, you know, applications, it really, really shines that it's like almost always, not almost always, but it is a large percentage. I think it's just like just over 50% of the time you're having a performance issue. It's not actually your fault. So still like, you know, optimize your images, optimize your code, but also start thinking about what is necessary for your site. And so I have a follow-up to this, but before that, I wanted to ask you all kind of, have you experienced major performance issues? Where kind of were they, and or what is like something that you stay away from because you want to avoid that kind of issue, whether it's performance or error-based?
Yeah. I actually had an issue recently with SQL alchemy in Python. So a lot of time, for a long time, we thought that the issue was the database itself, like the time it takes it to process the queries, but it actually wasn't. It's the serialization of the data coming from the database being done by that third party, and we're like, why am I using this? It's just saving me time writing SQL. And it's doing a terrible job at it. So it's one of those things that are easy to start with, and then you kind of regret maybe later. So yeah, so that's a top of mind example. But yeah, I can think of a lot of times where performance issues crept into my software through a third-party solution. Though I wasn't aware that this is and it actually kind of makes sense because more and more of your code is third-party code as we move forward.
Yeah, which I think
I
is
wasn't
good,
aware of
but
it.
like, yeah, it's a challenge.
That also connected to the point you mentioned before, that when you are developing dev tools, when you develop dev tools, your consumers or customers are actually creating bugs and blame you on that, right? So there's a cycle that never ends of third party to third party to third party that create bugs, and you'll never solve that, you know. There is always the stories on NPM with someone that just changed a line in one library and then millions of libraries infected and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, the point of the third party is super important with security because when you do all the shift left and developers need to be more worry about security, it's like a practice that we all need to adopt. Think about every third party as something that can get us to trouble.
I think with Sentry and also, I mean, with my previous company, Rookout, which is also a debugging solution, I think those scenarios really become very apparent or become very recursive. So it's almost impossible to debug something without altering it a little bit. And even that little alteration can affect things like race conditions and Heisenbugs dramatically. So, and then you have this tension between, do I want, and it's basically the almost the uncertainty principle, like in physics. Do I want to monitor and debug this, or do I want to actually see how it performs? And you have this constant tension. And I'm not sure if there's a good solution. Maybe like in physics, you move to another reality, and from that reality, maybe monitor this universe. I'm not sure what would be the equivalent in. You can maybe go into a hypervisor mode in the virtual machine, and that can maybe work. But that's really a lot of effort to set up your debugging just to, I don't know, set a breakpoint or get another log line.
I think that's part of why we try to focus on like what's happening in production and trying to capture what's happening in production. And obviously there's going to be some performance implications to having a monitoring tool in addition to it all, right? But ideally we're identifying the ones that are even worse than that. And like a follow-up to it is, we recently decided to remove all cookies from our entire marketing site. So any of our and our products too, but like, just everywhere we don't have cookies unless it's related to that exact session where you've logged in and you have, like agreed to have that be a part of your login, right? But anywhere where you're not logged in, we are not tracking you whatsoever. And part of that is a security thing. Part of that is a privacy thing. Part of that is a performance thing, right? Like it's about really considering what is necessary to have for our customers, which includes kind of the buyer persona, but also our customers as developers. And how can we help developers do better with minimal impact to them? So improving the performance of our SDKs, improving the performance of our even static sites, reducing the amount of tracking that we're doing. So I'm kind of curious, like, are there, this is starting to become a thing, like removing cookies from your site. I've seen more and more companies start to pop up saying that they're doing that. But I'm curious kind of y'all's perspective around things like cookies or things like social media integrations or things like that. Like, whether it's from a performance perspective or just a privacy perspective, what are your thoughts as developers on that?
I can say as a developer, I feel that cookies kind of get a bad rap. In the end of the day, it's just a mechanism to kind of perpetuate data, and a lot of times as a user, you have a lot of control in which cookies you save and not. It's very easy with ad blockers today, and it can be a legitimate thing just to maintain your session. But there's a lot of noise that you can get with third-party cookies that can be annoying. But personally, I'm not worried about the privacy aspect. I feel that I understand enough and I have enough tools that I can control it myself, regardless of the vendors I interact with. But I can see how it, like, if my grandmother, if she was still alive, she'd probably be drowning in cookies from all these third-party vendors. So there's something to be said there for like your general audience. I do think that from a performance perspective, it can be very dramatic, and a lot of times people misuse these tools. Like every tool could be like, if you have a hammer and you're seeing nails all around, you gotta be building wrong things. And I actually have a prominent example of that with Permit right now. So we do authorization, and we obviously connect to authentication. So we run into a lot of uses of the JSON Web Token. And that often is either persisted in a cookie or more frequently as a header. And people are like going gung-ho with it. Oh, I have this certified, verified document. I could just push more claims in there. And I've seen companies, for example, go about pushing in all the routes that they have in their app and what the user is allowed to do or not. And they're not aware that this is sent for every request.
Oh my gosh.
This is slowing down your entire app. And I'm imagining it probably started with like, okay, I'll just put 2 routes here and it's going to be fine. But then another developer came in and said, oh, we're pushing the routes into the JSON Web Token. Sure, let's just add another couple. And then it escalates very quickly. So yeah, there's definitely abuse that can be both a security issue, a privacy issue, and dramatically a performance issue. And especially with shifting left, it's our responsibility as developers to understand this stuff. But it's not always easy to kind of get the grips on all of this. Hopefully, listening to this podcast maybe helps. I don't know.
I remember when I started to code in .NET, I started with JavaScript back in 2010. I was, I think, one of the first one that believe in JavaScript as a programming language. But then I started to work with .NET, and I remember that one of the things that was so hard for me is the DLL that was compiled to artifact. So if I just wanted to click on something or library to understand how it works and how can I work better with it, I have no idea how to do it. There is just like a function signature that you can work with it. And I think it's about cultural thing with developers to be curious that I'm using now a library, I'm not using now a third-party tool. I want to understand how is that working. How can I work better with that? And that's is a symbiotic relationship between DevTool developers and developers themselves. They need to give the tools, but the developers also need to want to use them to create better software.
It's a really good point.
I agree. And all I was going to say is I like the fact that you're shifting away from collecting cookies because of the point that Or said, is that a lot of the general audience, they don't really understand what cookies are. It pops up and you're like, oh, you want to accept it or not? And then I know in Europe, they have better laws against cookies, but in America, they
GDPR.
don't. Yeah, y'all have the GDPR. So I know in America, they don't. And you gave that example of older people just accepting things without really understanding it. So I do like that option that,
Yeah, even things as simple as we don't embed YouTube videos on our site anymore because YouTube has cookies. And so when you click play on the embedded YouTube video, YouTube is now grabbing your cookies, right? Or putting cookies on your client. And so it's I think, or you kind of mentioned this is and it's about being very intentional with what you are including in your application, whether it's a website, a static website, whether it's an actual application. And Gabriel, you kind of mentioned this as well. If you're building dev tools, understand that developers are going to get curious, understand that they want to know how to, integrate with this better, and understand kind of be intentional about what you're including. I think is really critical.
That's a lesson for life, I think, in general,
yes.
And especially here. And I think it's a great cue to move to our third fact. And that one belongs to Rizal.
Yeah. All right. So my fact has to do with identity fraud and identity management. So I recently read this article that said Americans have over 100 passwords to remember, but I know we have password managers and all that, but those can easily get hacked. And I was just thinking about identity management as a whole as well. Even your personal identity, you might have an ID card, you lose that, that gets stolen. And then deepfakes are really prevalent. I just saw literally before I came on this podcast, OpenAI release this thing where you can essentially do text to video now. You can put in text and it will generate a video for you. So a lot of that identity fraud is really ramping up, and I think that means that our industry will eventually shift towards more cryptographic verification method. So I'll pause here, but I can explain more. I don't really have a question for y'all, but yeah, I can explain more.
No, you're bringing on an interesting and dramatic topic. Probably in 2 years' time, maybe even less, all of these technologies that are already blooming will be proliferant. It's going to be the entire space. All the scammers and all the spammers and the entire country of Nigeria are going to be using this tech to convince us to do a bunch of things. And I think it really shakens the foundations of how we behave as humans. One of the most basic things that we have is if I see your face, I hear your voice, I get your mannerisms, I automatically assume that that's you. And we're now all talking, by the way, more and more people were talking through video conferences. We interact in person even less. Though I'm guessing deep faking in-person interaction is also around the corner. But
scary.
Yeah. I don't know.
I do
So,
think like it has to do with like even just something like this podcast, right? Like,
Mhm.
Rizal and I, thank you so much for inviting us, and we wanted to come on here because we know you all running the podcast, and you wanted to have us as guests because of who we are, and if
Mhm.
like the more that we create content, the more likely it is for someone to make a deep fake on us, and then it's our voices that can't be trusted anymore, right? And I don't even just mean like my physical voice, like it is my actual physical voice, it's my face, it's my writing, it's my name. And so I agree with you, Rizal, that like, there needs to be some kind of verification that happens. And we saw this early with things like Twitter and verified users and things like that, especially for celebrities. But I think it's going to cause a major shift in how we consume and trust content as well, and what we can know to trust.
Yeah.
And on a similar note, like, thinking about AI and code being written by AI and AI being trained on code that has errors in it. And so then errors then being like
Mhm.
added to code that's written by AI, right? Like it's just this big cycle of what we say today on this podcast may not be true in a year.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
if the AI is based off of these conversations, it's not going to be relevant in a year. And what code is written a year ago isn't going to be relevant in a year. You know what I mean? So it's like, I think there's not only going to be a verifiable, like, verifiability. I don't know. That's not a word, but issue. But I think there's also going to be an issue when it comes to the quality and the accuracy of the content or the code, or fill in the blank here.
I think it potentially completely changes our definition of identity.
Yeah.
So up till now, we're not like asking for certificates or secret tokens from one another, but maybe we will. Maybe be like what's perceived as you is not enough. Maybe we need that authenticity or verification mechanisms, and that would make, I don't know if so. Now we start Zoom calls with, "Can anyone hear me?" We'll switch to, "Can anyone verify that I am who I am?" Are we all...
Honestly, as I have a 6-year-old child, and we have a password for her and me, and one for her and my mom, because if she were to get a call and it's a deep fake of our voice and she says something, so it's like, no, always verify with the password, and it's a unique single word that isn't something common. She loves dragons, but everyone knows that, so it's not dragon, and we just have to like, I think it's important though, right? Like it's scary. That's the
Yeah.
world we live in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the stuff y'all brought up actually touches on like part 2, which is the fact that like the company I work at called TBD is actually working on like what y'all were saying, right? So there's 2 different things. One is called like decentralized identifiers, and then the other one is called verifiable credentials. So when Orr brought up that idea of like having these certifications, like it's and a lot of people get like nervous when like you say the word decentralized, but like these are not like built on, well, some people are building them on blockchain, but these are not particularly built on blockchain, right? They're like basically just certificates that you can have and own and be like, hey, yeah, this is for sure my degree. This is for sure my driver's license, because it was like cryptographically signed. It's like a JSON web token now, and I can present it to this person, and it was cryptographically signed by like the Department of Motor Vehicles or like this particular university or school or whatever. So I'm excited about that. And I did start to do a little bit more research, and it's not only my company that has been working on that. And some people are actually like using this today, like people who use Blue Sky and have gotten themselves like verified, kind of like you would on Twitter. What's happening behind the scenes or underneath is you're using like a decentralized identifier, or even like on LinkedIn, where you can like verify that you work at a company. You can either do that by email, or you can do that by verifiable credential.
I'm really excited about decentralized IDs in general. Like, I love the idea of us, especially here in the States, owning our own medical records.
Yeah.
Like, that would just be wonderful if I could own them. I don't have to pay a hospital to get my own information, and I could move that from doctor to doctor, right? Instead of just relying on them to send the right documentation. And
Though I don't think that actually would solve the problem, because the fundamental problem with U.S. healthcare is that it's basically a monopoly. So they'll find those companies will find another way to abuse this. But this poses a lot of interesting questions about like what's down the road, both in the how we're going to behave as humans and the applications that we're going to use. And before we get paralyzed with excitement and dread, I think we should move to our fourth and last fact for this episode. And that fact belongs to Gabriel. Gabriel, give us your fact.
Absolutely. So my fact today is going to help me in an icebreaker call when people will say, hell, Linux is better than Windows, because probably Y2K error is also happening in Linux too. So apparently many Linux or Unix operation system saved the initial time, like January 1st, 1970, in a 32 integer, same as IPv4. And that's mean in the middle of 38, we will have the same Y2K error in Unix-based system. Now, the good news is that many distributions already started to use 64 integer to store their time. But if, for example, one bank or maybe some mobile provider will forget to change it in their mainframe, probably in Y238 will not be able to do something. I don't know why. Maybe that hit our houses.
Here.
And that bring me a lot of memory. I was 10 when Y2K error happened. I remember people were really worried about it. And that made me think about how people make small problems really large. And also when you talk about the IP and the IPv4 and 32 integer, I remember that when I used to work in Cisco back in 2018, and I had a lot of RCUs there, but I was really enjoyed the fact that IPv4 get the end of life. Not only me, Cisco stock also rise up because everyone just need to buy new switches, right? So all these problems just give us work and make sure that our stocks is rising and growing. So yeah, I think that's the way that programming world is going, right? Every time someone, let's say, tell me like, hey, AI will replace us, I said, no, we are just program more, and maybe it will be simple, but we'll get more and more computers in our life that someone will need to program them, right? Assuming that will be alive after 2K38.
I love that kind of all of our facts today were about like something that seems fairly small when we're deciding it, like, oh, let's have passwords for websites. Oh, let's make IPv4, 32-bit and oh, let's start having these like third-party scripts so that we don't have to write that code for, and it's just already there, and it all just kind of balloons, and it's ballooned really quickly, I think, in the last 5 years, I would even say, for all of these, right? But I mean, Gabriel, to your fun fact, I hope that we get an Office Space too, is all I'm saying.
I'd watch that. Yeah, I think it's about time they do it now, even without waiting for that long.
Right.
I kind of feel like the plot that we're living through should be something like this: like AI takes over all of our identities, but we're saved the last minute because of the Y2K38 bug. The AI crashes, and that's how humanity gets to.
I want to see like
day.
Milton get locked out of the building and he can't get in, but he's got his stapler, and that's how we know it's him.
He's I love that actor. I forgot his name, but that character is like the best in that movie. Yeah, something to look forward to. So every little bad thing also comes with a little bit of good. Definitely.
I have a question. Since y'all said that you experienced Y2K, I was young. So what was like the silliest thing that happened during
Oh my god!
I have a great story
My
about
neighbors bought full on like apocalyptic suits and had like literally and had like a bunch of like water and these gas masks and everything. It was pretty wild.
Yeah.
I didn't get something as exciting as that. The most I got was like getting really intense on installing Windows 98 Second Edition. So making sure that my computer would work the day after. That was like the peak of my worries at the time. But yeah, it ended up like everyone was excited. Oh, what's going to happen? And we waited for it, and then nothing happened. And to some degree, it was a little bit of a letdown. I kind of expected nuclear reactors to explode and satellites to fall off from space, but it was instead of a bang, it was a whimper.
Climactic.
Yeah, very much so.
I had no clue. I was like 5 years old, just in kindergarten.
So I grew up in a religious community, and we are saving the day of Shabbat. So from like Friday night evening to Saturday night, we are not using computer, not touching electricity, etc. And the Y2K error was in Friday evening. And I remember that I just went to sleep because no one worried about it. It was like, hey, we anyway did not touch the computer or something. Whatever, we'll find out what happened after Shabbat. And then in midnight, I woke up. The neighbor in front of our building just went out of the to the balcony and screamed like, hey, nothing happened. Nothing happened. Electricity is still working. And it was like all the street went out. I'll never forget it.
Oh, that's great.
I think this also tells you a lot about how times change, or like the culture change. Yeah. So back then, everyone was like, oh, this is a big issue. Everyone should talk about it. Everyone should do something about it. And then we all kind of like sheeped into the funnel and just went with it. I think if something like that happened today, you'll have so many different voices saying, no, this is a hoax.
Gosh.
This is something the Illuminati are running. This is actually, no, it's good for the lizard people. You should actually go to this protest to support Y2K. I think it will be.
It's going to be reset to December 13th, 1901. That's Taylor Swift's birthday. She must be behind it.
Exactly. Stuff like that. And like, it's all because of the Super Bowl. That's why they're changing the times. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think it would be interesting to see by 2K38 how
I kind of want to make merch.
I think you should. You should start planning ahead. It's gonna be a turbulent road. I'm kind of confident.
I'm gonna make like gas masks.
Gas masks
Y2K38
and clocks that just take you like to that time, and maybe and upgrade software that increases your the integer sizes for specific applications, like maybe things for developers, like a third-party package that you import into your code that will make it date aware.
That'll just add a Milton stapler on your code. Nothing helpful. Just I'm gonna have AI make a Office Space 2.
Yeah, you can actually do that.
I know.
I'm already subscribing to your Substack to watch the teaser or preview of that movie.
Perfect.
And on that positive note and expectation for both the end of times and Office Space 2, I think we can wrap up. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Rizal. Thank you, Gabriel, for joining on this episode. And to our audience, thank you for listening.
I think this is the perfect time to wrap up the show. If you liked this podcast, tell your friends about it. If you didn't like it, tell your enemies about it.